I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. And this is the I Hate Politics candidate interview with Sarah Elfreth for Congress in Maryland's 3rd District. I'm Sunil Dasgupta, host of I Hate Politics, a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse, democratic, and sometimes divided societies. As part of the show, we have conversations with local, state, and sometimes federal candidates. Rather than ask how they stand on a multitude of issues, these conversations go in depth on a few issues and reveal the character of the candidates. Mail-in ballots for the upcoming May 14th primary are out. Early voting starts May 2nd. There are 3 congressional districts in Maryland where incumbents are not running. District 2 up by Baltimore, District 3 that centers around Howard and Anne Arundel County, and District 6, which starts in Montgomery and goes all the way to the mountains of western Maryland. The primary election in Maryland's 3rd District has a crowded field. Among the leading candidates is Sarah Elfreth, State Senator from Anne Arundel County since 2019. You can find interviews with other candidates in the I Hate Politics library, available on all major streaming platforms. Music for this episode are 2 short piano pieces from Kensington resident Adam Bobrow. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. Sarah Elfreth, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are running for the congressional seat in District 3 in Maryland, and you wanted to talk about the Chesapeake Bay. What is the nature of the problem you see in the Chesapeake Bay, and why should voters in District 3 vote on this issue?
Well, I wanted to talk about this issue because it's not one that usually gets a lot of headlines in campaigns, even though it's an incredibly important topic to the Senate district I've had the privilege of representing for 5+ years, and it's an important topic to the 3rd Congressional District broadly. So I wanted to kind of nerd out today a little bit about the importance of the Bay, obviously from an environmental standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint, how many jobs the Bay supports, and also frankly, the threat that the Bay poses to a lot of our communities when we're seeing sea level rise. Maryland is the 2nd most vulnerable state in the country, next to Florida. I'm sitting here in downtown Annapolis where I live, and my road to get to my house this morning was actually closed because of sea level rise. We're expecting over 4 feet of flooding in downtown, and this is not abnormal. This is an issue that impacts certainly Dorchester County on the shore, not sea level rise, but certainly storm surges and more severe weather is impacting communities across the state. Thinking about Ellicott City, which is also in the 3rd Congressional District in Howard County, they saw 2 1,000-year floods in 2 years.
There is tension between economic growth and the environment more generally. How does that apply to the Bay itself?
I think we are often asked to make kind of false policy choices between the economy and the environment generally, and I don't think we always have to. A great example of that is helping to meet our renewable energy goals, which are, we think about climate change and sea level rise. We have to think about it from how are we preventing it and kind of turning back the clock. In 2019, the General Assembly passed the Clean Energy Jobs Act with setting a goal to get to 50% renewable energy by 2030. And then we definitely did not give a strategy for how to get there. We just kind of made the goal and walked away, and the market reacts the way the market reacts. And in the case of solar energy, the market reacts in putting up solar on prime agriculture land or clear cutting of forests. If you look to our neighbors to the south in Virginia, they're losing, I think it's now tens of thousands of acres of forested land for solar arrays. And it's this trade-off that I do not think we have to make. But without leadership and strategy from the policy level, the market will invoke those trade-offs. So we stepped back here in Maryland last year and said, well, how do we incentivize our renewable energy goals where we want them the most and where they have the greatest ecological benefit? And the conclusion there is we need to put solar on more of the built environment. So rooftops, parking canopies, and try our best to not make the policy trade-off of losing agricultural land.
In terms of actual renewable energy goals, how much are you actually going to be able to prevent sea level rise by doing all of that?
While I don't know the impact of Maryland reaching 50% renewable energy by 2030 and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions significantly by the same time, I don't know the actual impact on the flooding that's occurring outside of my house right now. But at the same time, we have to do something. We have to be a leader.
Right. But making that connection between those renewable energy goals and actual impact is the reason why the Chesapeake does not make the headlines, is the reason why voters in District 3 may not, in fact, vote on the basis of the Chesapeake Bay itself.
That's an interesting point. And I'm going to sit on that a little bit more and think about how I can do it better. It's our greatest natural resource. I represent right now a district of peninsulas, basically. And it's where people choose to live, which is great. And it's an incredible quality of life. But as you can imagine...
Hold on. Isn't that the problem, that people are choosing to live in peninsulas and you're allowing it?
Well, allowing it is
like government, right? I'm not saying you personally, but we allow it.
Yeah, insurers allow it, and it's. I'm not sure how we reverse that trend. My job is to make sure, when we have a tree go down in a bad storm, like not even seeing flooding, not even having a tornado, just a tree goes down, takes down a power line in a bad storm, entire peninsulas get cut off. And this happens about once a year in my district. And at that point, I'm on the phone with BG&E, I'm on the phone with fire and emergency management, trying to communicate all these things. And we have to, I think, to your point, ground truth ourselves too. And it's not something my constituents like always to hear, but we chose to live here. There's one way in, one way out. We're going to have, especially with more severe storms, we're going to have these incidents happen more and more. And I think that's also another reason to think about resiliency and to think about renewable energy and renewable energy storage, because we're going to see power issues and energy issues. So the more people can generate on their own rooftops and store in their own rooftops, we have a program at the state that I'd love to work when I get to Congress to expand.
But if there's flooding and if there's those kinds of storms, what is even the point of having rooftop generation? At that point, you're evacuated. You're done.
Well, it depends on the severity of the storm. I'm talking about a storm, not a Hurricane Isabel. I'm talking about the annual storms that take down a power line on a peninsula and they're cut off for 18 hours. Solar generation on a rooftop, storage in your home is going to keep your energy on much longer than if you just relied on traditional power. There's a program that I'd like to work to expand in Congress that supports rooftop generation and power storage in community centers and in schools to be hubs, resilience hubs when this happens. So people, if they lose power to their homes, can at least go to their, little community clubhouse or the school down the street and rely on power until, BG&E gets power back on in 18 hours.
You did mention the trade-off between putting up solar panels and agricultural land. Now, agriculture is one of the biggest pollutants to the Chesapeake Bay. So, in fact, if you're concerned about pollutants, you might want less agriculture and more solar panels.
Well, I think that's because we haven't done enough on agriculture. We, for the last 40 years, have had a blanket approach to what we call best management practice, BMPs. So cover crops and riparian buffers, which are trees along a stream. We've had a total blanket approach across the state, across the watershed, to any farm that wanted it. not all farms are going to be the same in terms of their ecological benefit towards the region. And not all are going to be the same in terms of their opportunity for Chesapeake Bay health. So there are farms along in certain watersheds that are going to have a greater impact on that watershed and on the bay as a whole, just because of their geographic location. There are farms with legacy pollutants that we need to think smarter about. There are the way that we've done this blanket approach is we pay for one best management practice BMP at a time, without regard to where that farm is located. So our concept was, let's take a step back. Let's use the mapping data, which is very, very cool, to look at nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment runoff, to look at environmental justice components of how farms are impacting surrounding communities, and really target the farms that could make a difference, and then incentivize those farmers to do, it's a crazy thought, to do more than one BMP at a time. If they want to do cover crops, let's also get them to plant trees along their their fence line. Let's also.
But why not increase their income just by allowing them to put solar panels and generate power, and leave the land fallow underneath? Just reduce the amount of commercial industrial agriculture.
Well, that's certainly the choice of the farmer, and the work I've done doesn't say you can't do solar on farmland. It just says we should incentivize it more towards the built environment. But you still can. If that's the best economic choice for a farmer, they're gonna make that decision. And there's a lot of really.
But are there zoning considerations? Are there permitting considerations?
There are, and that's a local government issue. And I worked with Senator Katie Hester on that to try to streamline and make a little more conformity in the way that counties do, to your point, zoning and siting issues around solar. So we could do all the things at once. That work is still ongoing, and it's going to take a long time. But there's some really exciting stuff happening around what's called agrivoltaics. So to your point about wildflowers and pollinators, and part of the bill we worked on and passed on Monday, the Brighter Tomorrow Act, it incentivizes more agrivoltaics. So if you're going to do solar on farmland and you're going to seek a tax incentive from the state and from local government, you should be doing it with, and there's different ways to do agrivoltaics. There's grazing opportunities if you want to have sheep graze under the, and so you can have some farm activities and solar, or pollinators, or cover crops and carbon sequestration underneath the solar panels. There's ways to do that, and we've incentivized that in the Brighter Tomorrow Act. The other bill is really about how do we, I don't want to use the word demand, but how do we incentivize better behavior in the farms that are going to make the most difference for water quality, and instead of having this in no way nuanced blanket approach that we've taken for 40 years. And I think that's part of the solution moving forward.
Okay. Governor Moore and Housing Secretary Jake Day, they have made a big case for a shortage of housing supply in Maryland as they build more housing, right? Stormwater management is going to be a continuing and increasing issue.
Yeah.
What do you say to Governor Moore and Secretary Day about balancing stormwater management with increased housing? How is it done?
We've been asked to make these false policy choices between housing and the environment. And I've had many bills where the housing community has said, or developer community, you can't pass this bill because it would hurt affordable housing. But there's a way to do it. Last session, I worked with Delegate Sarah Love from Montgomery County on an update to the Forest Conservation Act, which doesn't treat every part of the state in terms of forested land the same, because they're not. They have different ecological value. If you're in a watershed, that's a different ecological value than if you have no streams near that forest.
So in Montgomery County, just to take an example, because you brought it up, where there has been a long-term focus on transit-oriented development, but in the Washington, D.C. region, according to the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, Montgomery County has lost for tree canopy, the second most, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Prince George's is the worst.
In Montgomery County, we didn't have the same standard around transit-oriented development that we are trying to bake into the Forest Conservation Act.
What is the difference?
Now, well, the difference is the forest preservation under the old formula, and then the replanting of forest is different now under what we revamped, and it didn't also take into account the differences in what we call priority forest versus non-priority forest in the bill. A problem with the original law from 1992 is I could take down an acre of forest right next to a stream, or really right next to the bay, and I just had to replant a quarter of that forest anywhere in the county. And if you plant it anywhere in the county and not in that watershed, you're obviously losing all of that ecological benefit.
But why not prevent building in the watershed in that endangered area in the first place? I mean, why are we doing all this, backwards? I mean, holding our nose around our head. I mean, just.
Yeah, it's a frustration I have. And listen, I am not an attorney, but I have been told by many smart attorneys we can't exercise what's called the takings clause and deny someone's rights to retain value on their own property. I don't love it, but it's a legal issue. We can't tell them they cannot.
But we protect beaches. We protect lots of places. It's not that it's not protected.
Right.
I mean, I think people have to be compensated, and then there is no takings.
Right. I think this is I would love to have a lawyer on this show to talk through it. I'm doing what I can in the confines of what I'm going to be legally allowed to do with state law. And, we have, pretty strong protections on what we call the critical area, which is 100-foot buffer from a watershed, which is really important. And we just updated the critical area law this past session.
Sure. But you just said that, the way the tree forest conservation law is that, you can take an acre of trees from near the bay and then plant it somewhere else. Well, if it's near the bay and if it affects, I mean, why not extend the critical area?
We didn't touch critical area in the forest con law. We said that we need to replant in that watershed. And so there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And for the first time, thinking through priority forest versus not, and the nuance of all of that. And we also set a standard for a no net loss of trees, as in terms of forest conservation, and that's done by county. And then for the whole state, we set in that we have a goal of a net gain of forest and tree canopy, which are two different things in state law, forest and tree canopy. But that is our new goal. So reversing this trend of tree loss and afforestation. And we're going to do that in a couple of ways. A few years back, we passed the Tree Solutions Now Act, which is really exciting, to plant 5 million trees and to do it in a strategic way. So on farmland, in suburbs. But the piece that I'm really happy about and had the privilege of co-authoring with then Delegate Tony Bridges in Baltimore City was a focus on urban trees. Because we have too many communities in our state, in this country, that I like to call are under-treed, that have no tree canopy, and we know the connection between trees and, let's say, air quality and asthma rates in communities. So a total environmental justice issue. We know the connection we just talked about, trees and flooding and stormwater, trees and shade and the heat island effect. So it's no coincidence that the most developed parts of this state don't have trees and are hotter than the parts of the state that are forested. And so we built that into the Urban Trees program run by the Chesapeake Bay Trust to focus on replanting trees in communities that need it the most.
Which watersheds in Maryland do you think are critical in this respect? And what is not critical? Is some place like Montgomery County not critical then? Or Prince George's County, which have had the highest tree loss? I
would suggest that the Anacostia in Prince George's is critical for a couple of reasons. And we did put an environmental justice lens onto our whole watershed bill because it is really impaired. It pops on the heat map. And it's also surrounded by communities that deserve greater ecological investment. And that investment isn't just trees. Trees are really important, but it's also, we talked about stormwater issues. We talked about public parks. Really important to my district, and I think a huge environmental justice issue is public water access. The fact that we have more coastline in the state than anybody else and a shockingly small amount of public water access points. I think it's like we're up to 600 public water access points in the state, despite our coastline. And
anything else apart from Anacostia?
Okay. There is really great work going on in the Middle Branch right now in Baltimore City. I would suggest there's a whole lot of watersheds on the Eastern Shore that also need attention because, we talked about agriculture before, because of the interventions and frankly, interventions, best management practices on agriculture are a lot less expensive than in a suburban or urban environment. So we can get a lot more bang for our buck over there. Obviously, my district, really important, the Severn River, the South River, there's a whole lot of watersheds.
You did talk about private property. The reason you don't have public water access is that it is enclosed by private property. We come back to that balance between what you can do for the environment and what other considerations they are, including economic growth, housing, private property. Maybe address how that can actually be done, and if there are ways that you have been able to do that to make it so that climate action environment really is the headline.
My job is to continually move the ball forward. It's to use the best science. It's to make, to your point, the argument and the case for why the public's investment is necessary and critical. And, from a climate change perspective, more people are caring about the environment because climate change is making them care, because it's showing up in their backyards or their basements or their small businesses. I mean, it's an unfortunate reality of a changing climate that more people are going to be impacted. And I hope, and I've seen greater engagement in the environmental space because people are seeing that it's not happening in 20 years. It's happening now. I've had 2 tornadoes and 3 floods of record in my district in 5 years I've been a senator. It is happening. And so
do you think people in Ellicott City, even after the floods, right, are going to actually come out and support significant, for example, renewable energy goals? I imagine they'll come out and support for flooding measures. Mm-hmm. But will they come out and support renewable energy goals in Ellicott City?
I think so, because I think the whole point of your question is, how do we make that nexus? How do we make that connection between the two things? And again, we're not in a position to throw up our hands and say, okay, we're just going to sink into the sea. We're not going to do anything about it. Maybe it's not going to change the course of climate change, and maybe I'm tilting at a windmill, but my job is to move the ball forward. My job is to convince people that we are not in a position to throw up our hands and surrender to what's happening. We have to be a part of the solution.
So is there a environmental Chesapeake Bay protection case not to rebuild the Key Bridge?
I would suggest no, and because of the traffic, simply because of the traffic that it's creating now without the Key Bridge, because so much of what's being shipped into and out of the Port of Baltimore can't go through the tunnels because it's sensitive material, so they have to take out the Beltway, and that's creating. Let's just talk about the carbon emissions from that's creating. So no, I think it's imperative from, obviously the economic perspective is paramount here in reopening one of the most important and largest ports in the country, but also from a simple carbon emission and getting trucks and cars in and out of that port, the rebuilding of the bridge is critical.
Sarah Elfreth, thank you for taking the time. Good luck in the campaign.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
That's Maryland State Senator Sarah Elfreth, who is running for Congress in Maryland's 3rd District with centers on Howard and Anne Arundel counties. You can find her at sarahelfreth.com. Music for this episode comes from Kensington resident Adam Bobrow. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you'll listen, Like and share the show as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. Mail-in ballots are out. Early voting starts May 2nd. Primary day is May 14th. See you next time.